So you mentioned that you believe that being blind helps you being a better judge.
Yes.
And full disclosure, the Talmud says that, but bear with me until the end.
Of course.
The Talmud says that a blind person cannot serve in a Supreme Court of Israel. 1 second. Maimonides writes that in law as well. He could serve on monetary issues, but not on regarding the capital punishment.
Right.
Does the state of Michigan have the death penalty?
No.
You do not have a death
No.
penalty. But the commentators ask, we know that throughout Jewish history we had many judges who were blind. For example, there were 2 judges in Venice who were blind. There was a judge in the city of Izmir in Turkey who was blind. There are 2 great Talmudic scholars who were judges, Rav Yosef and Rav Sheshet, were both blind. So the commentators say there's an exception to a blind person who is permitted to serve in the Supreme Court. And that is if the community accepts them upon themselves as a judge. Meaning they cannot be appointed as judges, but they can be chosen as judges. So you were chosen by over 1.4 million
Correct.
Voters in the state of Michigan. So you could fit along with Jewish law since you were chosen by the people and not just appointed from above.
That's actually fascinating. First, I didn't know that. And I am completely fascinated by what you say because ultimately it fits exactly with what you're indicating because your point is such a powerful point because I just have to tell you, in Michigan, we're elected. And there's 11 million people who live in our great state. And if you want to serve in this position, you have to be elected by the people of the state of Michigan, not appointed. And this is such a powerful thing that you just said, because I will tell you unequivocally, if I had to go in front of a merit selection committee, I can tell you what they would do. They would say, this is so inspiring that this blind person wants to be a judge. I'm so inspired. But the minute the doors close and you leave, they would say, you know what, this isn't going to work. Let's not take a chance. He doesn't look like us. He doesn't sound like us. He doesn't act like us. So why don't we just go with someone who we know is going to fit in and just not make this anything more difficult than it needs to be. But based on what you just said, which I'm totally captivated by, I think the electoral process is more important. Because if it had been an appointment, I think there'd be doubts and concerns and things would arise. But in this situation, I was elected overwhelmingly by the people of the state. And what was interesting about it is that when they polled people and asked them, are you okay electing a person with a severe disability to such a high post? People said, not only are we okay with it, but this is what we prefer because of his circumstance and because of his difficulties. He's able to understand and appreciate the challenges that we face, having parents that are struggling, having kids that are getting bullied, dealing with unemployment, dealing with just the challenges of life. What people said was a person who is blind and who understands the difficulties that we have to contend with every day is a far better representative than someone who comes out of some blue chip law firm that doesn't know adversity.
Blue chip
exactly
law
what
firms?
you just said.
I want to give you a few scenarios and you tell me your thoughts.
Okay.
The Tower of Babel. People were fighting amongst themselves. God punished them that they're not going to be able to communicate with each other. God spread them out with 70 languages. The people of Sodom, once they were not welcoming the angels who came to visit Lot's house, were punished with hukuba sanverim. They were punished with blindness. What do you think is a greater punishment? Not to be able to communicate or not to be able to see?
That's a phenomenal question. These are phenomenal questions. Like, I am really enjoying this. This is like one of the best interviews I've ever had because it's deep and it's insightful and it's probative and it's just exciting.
Everyone loves compliments, especially rabbis.
But I'm just going to tell you, I'm really into this. I think that if you had to have a disability, not that you would want one, I think blindness, for me, is a disability that I can live with and work with. And there are certain benefits that come with it. The first one is I get to experience the warmth and love of people every day. That's what gives me such meaning and joy. I mean, think about it. When you're blind, people will always approach you. They'll always come to you. They'll always help you. You get to see the absolute best of human nature as a blind person. But your question goes to, if you had to have a disability, would it be blindness, or if you had no hearing? Not being able to communicate would be far more difficult and would be far more painful and would be far more challenging, especially for somebody like me. There's nothing harder than isolation. Isolation is one of the worst things that you could ever do to someone, is isolate them. And for me, the one thing about my disability is I physically cannot be isolated. Blind people cannot survive by themselves. In fact, all of our education, all of our teaching, the way that we survive is based off of human interaction. We can't do it without human interaction. It's all we do is interact with people. And so, based on your question, the ability for me to have people touch you, approach you, guide you, help you, assist you, do anything that they can to be close to you. I basically spend my day, especially here in the city, when you go out and you go to the park and you go to Achilles, you basically just get to experience the warmth and beauty of people every single day. And how many people get to say that that's how their life is?
I want to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. What do you think is that people with sight misunderstand most about blind people?
So I think what it really comes down to is people who are blind, and this is an interesting stat that I'm going to give you. According to the U.S. Department of Census, 85% of the blind population is currently unemployed. Now, that's not because...
Or serving on the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, that's not because they're not talented and they're not capable and they're not awesome in every possible way. It's socioeconomic. It's exclusively socioeconomic. If I hadn't come from the family that I came from, if I hadn't been from the background that I was blessed to have, if I didn't have the parents that I had or the family that I had...
If you hadn't sued the American Bar Association.
Right. But if I didn't have the background or the ability to get these opportunities, I would be part of that 85% that's unemployed. There's no question. If I wasn't born into the family and given the chances and the opportunities I've been given, I would be in that 85% that's unemployed. The key to it, and I think the essence to kind of what you're saying is in terms of what is the message for folks that, have sight, I think it's simple. People like myself and people who have disabilities, we know what we're capable of doing. We know what we can achieve and we know what we can accomplish. We need folks who are not disabled to simply give us an opportunity and provide us with a chance.
Could I ask you a question? Do you light
anything? I'm enjoying this so much.
Do you light the Hanukkah candles?
I would not light a candle on my own. If somebody were to guide my hand, I would be able to do it.
So there's a debate, since the mitzvah of lighting Hanukkah candles is to be able to partake and see them.
I see.
We try to promote the miracle of the defeat over the Greeks, and therefore we light the Hanukkah candles. And there's a debate amongst Jewish commentators, amongst whether you say a blessing if you're blind or not. In Jerusalem, blind people would make a blessing, even though they cannot see. The simple understanding is if you can't see, you can't make a blessing. But in Jerusalem, the practice was for blind people to make a blessing. I want to give you another example of a debate. one of the first blessings we say in the morning is, "Blessed are you, God, the King of the universe, Pokeach Ivrim, the one who gives sight to the blind." The commentators debated whether a blind person should make that blessing.
I think you have to go to the intent. God created me, but he created me this way, and he had a reason for it. I really believe it. It wasn't just happenstance. There's something deeper that he created. And I think that when you look at this, it goes back to this whole notion. I have been so blessed in my life. I mean, my life has just been extraordinary. I mean, going to the question that you're asking about the blessings, but also going to the idea of capabilities of people. I have had the opportunity to travel the world. I've been invited to go to countries from Asia to the Middle East to South America to literally everywhere. And I've had the opportunity to work with governments and to work with kings and to work with just anyone you can think of. And the idea is that we change perspective. We change how people see us.
By the way, what's the most accommodating country towards people with disabilities in the world, in your opinion?
Well, I would say that the two that, the way you would answer that question is you'd always take it in a diplomatic fashion, right? Because it's my job to,
Besides for the state of Michigan.
Right, but it's my job to basically go to these places and work with their governments, work with the media, work with the press.
What societies have gone the furthest in accommodating people with disabilities?
Well, I would
say...
And
you like traveling?
Well, when I travel, it's always for work, right? So it's always basically like I was asked to participate. I spent quite a lot of time in the Middle East, and I was asked to help to facilitate and help to kind of allow for the Abraham Accords to develop a key component, which is disability. What people don't realize is the Abraham Accords are one of the most significant, remarkable peace agreements that have ever been fashioned. I mean, they're just remarkable. And what people don't realize is it's going to change the landscape of the Middle East. So I was asked to advance this because so many people who are in power throughout the Middle East, so many kings, so many folks that are leaders of government have children that have severe special needs. But throughout the Arab world, those children are not really seen or heard. But what was incredible about this is that through the Abraham Accords, many of the folks throughout the Arab world said, would you be willing to come and work with us? Would you be willing to come and help us understand and appreciate what can be done? And Israel, of course, said, look, if you're willing to go and do this, you could help us tremendously. This will help us tremendously. If you've been given these invitations by royal families across the Middle East, if you're willing to work with us on this, go and spend time with them. Go and work with their children. It will foster relationships between us and countries on a personal level. And through those personal relationships, extraordinary things can happen. But we need you to please go to these countries and work with these kingdoms because they're asking for you. And I'll just tell you what was amazing was one of the kings looked at me and said...
Can you disclose who?
No. But one of the kings looked at me and said, I never realized the potential of my child. I never realized what he has the potential of doing. I never realized the contributions he can make, but I do now. And he went on to say, how do we make this better? What can we do to make these changes come? And that's where Israel comes in, because Israel has the technical know-how to design programs and schools and services and job placement and transit and accessible technology and athletics. And all of these relationships are now being fostered and coming together. And I'll just tell you one like last quick story about this in terms of why I believe so strongly that we're sent here for a reason and for a purpose and for a mission that we might not understand.
You talk like a rabbi. That's the truth.
But this is like the way I.
You said Hashem more times than I did.
But it's crazy because I'm not a learned person in this topic, but I just have come to believe that this is the essence of life. And I will tell you one quick story. I was in Israel during the time of the war just a couple weeks ago with Hamas. And what was intense about the war was you would spend about, basically 12 days in a bomb shelter. And the reason I had to be in the bomb shelter for a significant part of the time is because I can't move as quickly. You only have 90 seconds to get to the bomb shelter. And what would happen is that you would hear, I'm sure this audience knows, but I don't think the general public understands that there were over 5,000 missiles that were fired into Israel. And many of them were sent into central Tel Aviv and that area. And I can just tell you, so many people here, I'm sure, have that connection with Israel, so they know what I'm saying. But for me, when you'd be in the shelter and you hear the sirens, and you'd hear the sounds of the missiles, and you'd hear the woo, woo, and then you'd hear the which is the Iron Dome that would be launching, and you'd hear the intersecting missiles being launched, and then you'd hear the boom as the intersecting missile would basically interact with the missiles that were being sent in your direction. For a blind person, the intensity of this is difficult for people to understand because we're so sensitive to everything that even in the shelter, when the intersecting missile would hit the missiles and you hear the boom, the whole shelter would just vibrate and rock violently. And I remember the US was evacuating the embassy, but the Israelis said, look, Judge, we know how tough this is for you. We know how hard these nights are for you. We know what you're having to contend with. We get it. We do understand that for you, the vibrations and the intensity of it are far more pervasive than they are for someone who has vision, because your whole body feels it. We get it. We understand. But you've become the face of this. The Jerusalem Post did a whole story about it. You become the face of this. This idea of hope and optimism, this idea of bringing people out of the shadows, this idea of letting disabled people have better lives. The sheikhs are basically saying that this is important, that they're looking at things differently, and they're working with Israel, and they're excited about working with Israel on this project. They would say, look, you have to keep doing what you're doing. You can't leave. You've got to be on TV. You've got to be in the news. You've got to be showcasing that you're still here. You've got to be showcasing that you're not going anywhere. And you have to be showcasing the fact that as a blind person, you're not going to let Hamas drive you out of this country. And so we did that. And I'll just say this quickly. What made it meaningful and worthwhile was there was a TV interview that aired all through the Middle East. And it was myself. It was the Israeli point person on peace agreements. And then it was one of the top sheikhs. And this was the day after the war. And a number of the countries were kind of waffling as to their relationships with Israel. And the sheikh came on television and he said, I want to be very clear about this. We have to move forward. People cannot live in the shadows. Disabled people cannot live in the shadows. We are moving forward. There's too much at stake. We have the ability to have partnerships and relationships and friendships, and we are not going to turn back. We are moving forward because there are too many people who need to come out of the shadows and into the light. And one of the reasons that they feel confident that the sheikhs were so adamant about this was because of that personal connection they had to disability, that personal understanding they had of disability, that personal relationship they had to disability. At the end of the day, when it's personal, when you understand it, when you appreciate it, when it's your family, when it's your children, when it's people that you love, that will supersede everything else.
So what's your interpretation of why bad things happen to good people?
My interpretation of why bad things, and again, everyone has to approach life differently. There are certain aberrations that you're not going to be able to define, that you're not going to be able to explain. It's just, then I'm not even going to attempt to do that. I can only say how I look at my life, how I've experienced my life, how I have basically found the mission and the purpose and the reason to exist in my life. And I'm actually going to go to a story that you started, but I really think it's important to finish. And it's the story of the angel visiting Jacob. And as we know from that story, what is it that happened? There was a huge battle, and the battle raged through the night into the morning. And when the sun rose, the angel blessed Jacob, but he gave him a new name, the name of Israel, which, as we all know, means one who struggles with God. But we also know that he left him with an injury. He had a shattered hip, he walked with a limp, and he knew incredible pain for the remainder of his days. Why do bad things happen to good people? I think this is the answer. If Jacob hadn't been given pain, loss, adversity, and struggle in his life, he wouldn't be able to connect. He wouldn't be able to understand. He wouldn't be able to relate. What makes a good leader is one thing. It's not about your education. It's not about your academics. It's not about how smart you are. None of that matters. It is your ability to understand and comprehend struggle. Because if you understand it and if you live with it, you're able to appreciate others. And you're able to appreciate their circumstances and their situations. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because when bad things happen to good people become even kinder. They become even warmer. They become even nicer. They become even more impassioned, and they become even more understanding because they have the blessing of experience. And when you have the blessing of experience, you come to realize something incredibly significant. So often, people that live with challenge and adversity and struggle have severe physical limitations, but you know what you come to find about them? They have the strongest of spirits and the most resilience of souls. And it's their souls and their spirits that break free from their body and touch the face of God. When you ask that question, why do bad things happen to good people? I think it goes down to a simple answer. Sometimes in life, you simply can't focus on trying to get over it. You simply just have to decide that you have no other choice, no other option but to just get on with it. And when you do that, you'll find what I found. When I was running my 18th marathon, after getting released from the hospital, running through the streets of New York, facing pain that was indescribable, as we got to the 59th Street Bridge and we started running up First Avenue, I remember reaching up to the heavens, and I remember praying to Hashem and saying, let me have this. Let me have this. I want to turn a page. I want to move forward, but just let me have this. And I remember the pain was so immense that right on First Avenue, we had a battle. And it was a fierce battle. And I'm going to tell you something. You could see the lightning and you could feel the thunder. This was pure rage, pure anger that was just disseminating from every aspect of my body. And then, after that dissipated, I found what I always wanted to find. At that moment on First Avenue at mile 18, I got what I was looking for. I was able to find peace with my body, my circumstance, my new life, but I was able to get what I've been always wanting to have. I was able to find and make my peace with God.
It's beautiful.